So in terms of the monomyth itself, we begin the story with Perseus being a fisherman, very much like the original myth, with his adopted family. And things begin to change, of course, when they witness the soldiers on the top of the cliff in the shores of Argos breaking down Zeus's statue. And that is notable because, of course, it sets up the primary conflict of the film, which is opposed to, man versus monster of the myth, man versus Medusa, and eventually becomes man versus man. When Perseus confronts Polydectes, this conflict is set up as man versus God, and especially the ways in which men are trying to gain their independence from the gods. And as we see towards the end of the semester, this is going to be the main conflict as well, or the question in the myth of Prometheus. So we find Perseus on the boat. Hades comes in, annihilates the soldiers, and notices Perseus on the boat and sends his entire family to their death. Perseus survives, whether it's because he's a demigod or not exactly sure, but he survives. The remaining soldiers of Argos take him with him, and there's is where he witnesses Hades appearing again and revealing that he is, in fact, a demigod. So, of course, the people of Argos, being caught between a rock and a hard place, compelled to sacrifice Andromeda, asks Perseus for his help, but he refuses because he's not even aware of his own origin story or his destiny, and he requires Io to reveal to him that he is actually the son of Zeus and that his destiny is to defeat the Kraken and by the same token defeat Hades, even though he cannot be killed. So triggered by revenge, he eventually accepts the call to adventure, but after refusing it. So he meets the mentor. Mentor is Io. We could also characterize Draco, the general of the soldiers, as his mentor. And then they go in together into the crossing the threshold, which is in the film represented by the forest. There are various test allies and enemies. Beyond the soldiers, his allies, of course, is Io, the hunters. He receives various gifts, the sword, Pegasus. But at first he refuses them because, as he claims to Draco, he wants to do this as a man. Interesting twist, because this is going to become prevalent until eventually it comes to full realization towards the end of the myth. Of course, the Calibus makes his appearance, the scorpions, and then the Jinns rescue him. This is all part of that stage where he goes into the special worlds and meets these supernatural creatures. The cave of the Gorgons is not necessarily a cave. It seems to be an underground dwelling, and they have to ask passage from Charon to be able to go there. And interestingly, he accepts a gift from Zeus, even though he refuses to join him in Olympus. So like in the myth, he defeats the Medusa using the same technique, looking into the shield, which was not given to him by Athena, but given to him by the hunters, and chops her head off. He bags the head, and on the way out, on the road back, he confronts Calibos one last time after he kills Io, and at the moment of his death, as Calibos becomes Acrisius again, tells him, don't become like them. So there's this sort of repetition of this central theme and conflict of man versus gods throughout. So, but in order to fulfill his destiny, he needs to accept the gifts from Zeus. He uses the sword to defeat Calibos and uses Pegasus to fly back just in time, of course, to confront Kraken, who's been rising from the ocean. And at the same time, we notice that Hades has been fooling Zeus to try to overthrow him. So we have this sort of theme of succession as well going on here, but in this case, Hades is configured as the villain, which is not necessarily accurate because Hades is not necessarily a villain. He is just the god of the underworld. But in sort of contemporary Christian stories, you always need some configuration of the devil or the villain that is this evil character, like Hades. So he eventually defeats the Kraken by using the head of Medusa, similar to the myth, And that's it's typical of his resurrection, where he comes into being, fulfill his destiny. But what is interesting is that he fulfills his destiny, and that's the elixir, and that's the sort of ultimate key to the journey and his character. He does so by realizing that he needs to embrace his godlike nature. In other words, Perseus, as the embodiment of human self-determination, needs to embody the human as much as the divine to be able to complete self-realization. So, interestingly, this idea of the divine in contemporary or modern film makes its apparition at a time where we are much considered a secular society. But it's an important idea and theme throughout the film, this sort of idea that man is rebelling against God, whereas what man needs to do is to embrace his godlike nature. In other words, that he may or may not have been created by the gods. I mean, that's the idea that is propelled in the film, and that's the idea, of course, of Christianity as well. But that even if we don't want to side with the gods, we want to remain on the side of the humans, as Perseus does when he refuses Zeus's offer. We need to embrace our divine nature. So that's a completely new theme as compared to the myth. But what is interesting, as this sort of claiming his own humanity, Perseus also introduces the idea of the human spirit. And the human spirit is the idea that regardless of the consequences, we never give up. And we never give up not only as individuals, but also in helping each other out. So that comes into play, of course, when there is this antagonism between Draco and Perseus at the beginning, and eventually where they realize that Perseus is sort of humanity's last hope, because he's able to embody this dual nature of his character.